Welcome to the Planning Committee. Before we start, I'll just read out the following document. Please note that this meeting will be recorded for subsequent broadcast via the authority's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the authority. The public seating areas will be in view with the camera, and by entering the chamber and using the public seating area, members of the public are consented to being filmed, and the possible use of those images and sound recordings as outlined above. So, welcome to everyone. Perhaps the first thing to do is for us to introduce ourselves. I'm Clive Tydfil, the chair of the Planning Committee.
Yeah, I'm Hugh Roberts. I'm the group leader in Development Control.
I'm David Cross, Principal Planning Officer.
Simon Jones, Solicitor with the Authority.
Merthyr Phillips, Democratic Services Officer.
Paul Lewis, Trading Standards and Licensing Manager.
The first item is apologies for absence. Everyone, there's no apologies. The next item are any declarations of interest. Yes.
Got it. Regarding item number 9, taxi licensing, being a taxi driver and a taxi proprietor, I declare personal and prejudicial interest in that.
In relation to item 6, the former School Santos Tydfil School, Queen's Road, the Standards Committee undertook a ruling for all council members if they were nominated as a school governor that they need to declare it. I'm a school governor for Cyfarthfa High School because this site abuts a playing field which is part of the Cyfarthfa High School grounds that they use. But according to the decision made at the Standards Committee, I'm entitled to speak and vote.
There'll be a slight change in the order because Paul has taken us through a licensing document to save him being sat here for a long time. We'll go to item number 9 next, if that's okay with everyone.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the report in front of you today is in relation to a taxi licensing policy in relation to applications and to take you through some changes that we are proposing to make. Members may be aware that in October 2015 a new policy on the application process was introduced. This was brought about following the Casey review into child sexual exploitation in Rotherham and the links that was established with the taxi trade. This report before you today seeks to update this policy with some clarity on renewals of a vehicle licence and also update the advanced driving test requirement for a new applicant. It's also proposed to introduce a knowledge test for new applicants. In granting a licence to drivers, we have to satisfy ourselves that the driver is a fit and proper person to hold a licence. Currently, we assess an applicant on driving standards, their past criminal history and their medical capacity. The introduction of a knowledge test will test their knowledge on the locality, their numeracy skills and their knowledge of our bylaws and conditions. We will constantly look to ensure this test is fit for purpose and we hope to include safeguarding and equality elements to the test as it progresses. We seek to give grandfather rights to existing drivers. However, the requirement to undertake a knowledge test could be a sanction should a driver be brought back before the licensing subcommittee for a licence review. The recommendation to this report is committee resolved that the amendments to the taxi application policy are approved and for a 28-day consultation period to be taken for the introduction of the knowledge test. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Has anyone got any comments, Clive?
Yeah, I got a question, Chair, and it's in relation to the policies on page 43 under the heading Application Process, number 2. And it refers that the applicant must have held a full UK driving licence for a minimum period of 12 months when the application is made. The driving licence must be presented for examination with the application form. I felt for some time, having sat on the licence committee for a number of years, is that the 52-week period that is required for a full UK driving licence, when you have the ultimate responsibility of driving a hackney carriage or a private hire, I honestly believe that that needs to be thoroughly looked at. You know, when somebody passes their driving test, or wherever they are, they're still learning to drive from the day after they pass their driving test. And I just asked Chairman if that has been seriously looked at.
What I can state is that period of time is stipulated in the legislation. It's not a policy decision that we as a council have brought in. That is a requirement of under the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act. It actually states that's the criteria, so we have very little control. If we try to bring any sort of control measure on that, it would be likely to be overturned on appeal.
Howard?
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the street test, the written test, is that going to be a written test in front of you yourselves?
The intention is it will be, the location test will be a verbal description where I will sit down with applicants and I will vary known locations in the town, possibly around tourist attractions, and I will ask the driver, the applicant, to take me from A to B in the quickest appropriate time and be able to explain that to me, that I can understand that they are comfortable in knowing the routes around Merthyr Tydfil.
To follow on that, if an applicant hasn't got a very good knowledge of the English language, will he be allowed an interpreter to come in, or has he got to have a good understanding of street names and the English language?
The important part is the driver will understand my instruction and will be able to verbalise to me the route to take between the two quickest points. There is recent appeal case with Transport for London who introduced a similar type criteria, and it was held on appeal that understanding the English language correctly for both the passenger and the driver was of importance for health and safety. So it will be part of my consideration that the person is able to understand my instruction, and vice versa, I'm able to understand any instruction he gives me in relation to transportation.
Thank you, Chair. You know, you bring it in this knowledge test now, Paul. I understand that in some of the other authorities, the neighbouring authorities, they have even tougher policies than we do. They have, I'm not sure what subject it would be specifically, but it would, they do a BTEC. Now in Cardiff they do it, I think in RCT they do it, and they have this knowledge test which you propose now to bring in. Our policy has been somewhat more lenient than other authorities, and for that reason we have applicants coming in from Cardiff, from RCT, from, I'm not sure about the other authorities, because it's easier to get a licence. Now you are changing the knowledge imposition, bringing that in. Has any thought been given to requiring them to do BTEC qualifications as they do in other authorities, and if not, could you explain why not?
There are a small number of Welsh authorities, but nationally there are a number of authorities who brought in the BTEC qualification. We have discussed it, and we've spoke with other authorities who have introduced the BTEC and the difficulties they've had in fulfilling course numbers and being able to provide the course. We've tried to take a proportionate response to what is happening on the street in Merthyr at the moment and with our applications, and I suppose what we've done is taken a middle ground. I don't think any of our drivers in Merthyr warrant having to go through a BTEC, in that the standards are so low. But I think what we are seeing, and as you've correctly picked up, Councillor Ramos, we are seeing a lot of applicants coming from out of the borough to obtain a licence within Merthyr, and then possibly having no intention to work in Merthyr. So what we feel is proportionate, that if we bring the knowledge test in around locality, that will identify that they do have an intention to work in Merthyr Tydfil, and will be able to satisfy customers but I do take your point that it's still not to the full extent that some authorities have brought in a BTEC, but we feel it's a proportionate middle ground to ensure that our drivers are meeting the correct standard that they've been adhering to date, but to meet this problem of external drivers coming to the area with a view to our being a weak granting of licence. So we see it as a middle ground and proportionate. But of course, if the standards do slip, or that the knowledge test isn't adequate, then we can always revisit and with a view to perhaps introducing a BTEC.
In respect of the knowledge test, I know you say obviously it's going to be yourself possibly sitting there and having someone guide you through location to location. In respect of that, what kind of sort of pass percentage rate are you looking at in respect of, like, say, out of 10 sort of different routes that you propose, how many of those you expected someone to know? Is it going to be like 100% guarantee, or is there something there?
We would look, it's not going to be a matter of going through 10 different routes. We're going to bring in, there'll be written tests over conditions and bylaws. So we'll expect drivers to understand what their obligations are. It'll be a matter of picking 4 routes, and I'd expect a taxi driver on the routes we pick to know all 4. They're not going to be intricate as in terms of names of streets and numbers. But if somebody has to be picked up from Prince Charles Hospital, for instance, and be taken to Pentrabach, I would expect any person who seeks to work in Merthyr would know roughly that route. So I'd be looking for 100% in terms of knowing the area. The idea is that anybody could get into a taxi in Merthyr and would be able to have a rough estimate how to get to Merthyr Vale, Dowlais Top, etc. I wouldn't expect them to know the intricacies of the exact where the house is, but a knowledge of the area between A and B will be expected to be known for every answer.
Right, yeah, I think you possibly answered part of my question there. Is it going to include the outlying villages or just Merthyr Town Centre?
No, if we look at the tourist attractions in the south of Merthyr in relation to Millennium Park, Rock Centre, they form a vital part of our tourist attraction. So again, one question would be at the train station, your client wishes to go to the Rock Centre in Bedlinog. I would expect our drivers to know where they are if they to provide a proper service for Merthyr Tydfil.
Are they allowed to take the GPS into the exam? No.
Most definitely not, no.
No, comment? Yeah. Chair, I fully endorse the recommendation under 3.2 that the knowledge test will test exactly the driver's knowledge of the Merthyr Tydfil area. And together, obviously, alongside the numeracy skills and the awareness of the legislation relating to taxi licensing, which is extremely important.
Resolved that the amendments taxi licensing application policy are approved, and to go out for a 28 days consultation period for the introduction of a knowledge test. So is anyone forward proposing the motion? A seconder?
I'll second it, Chair.
Okay, you can stop for the rest of the meeting if you want. Hold on. Oh. Well, the next item is election of a vice chairperson. The next item is election of a chairman for or chairperson for the planning committee. So are there any nominations? Yeah. Oh, you seconded it. Any other nominations? Yeah.
Nominate Councillor Clive Jones. Is Councillor Barrett eligible to stand as a cabinet member?
So if you're on planning, being vice chair doesn't make a difference, does it? No, not to my knowledge.
Only do I show up.
Sorry, can we just request clarification on Howard's eligibility for Vice Chair, given his position on the Cabinet? In writing, please.
I think my initial view is if Councillor Barrett's on the planning committee, then I think it's automatic, he should be allowed. But we will look into it, you know, I mean, it's just me thinking that a common sense approach, but it may not be the case. We look into it and we let you know.
Chair, can you put your speaker on, please?
Oh, yeah, thanks, yeah. We had a fact-finding visit to the plot of land adjacent to 6 Brynch Sion on Monday the 31st of July, so there's nothing to comment further on that, really. So the next item on the agenda is the planning application P16 205, the plot of land adjacent to 6 Bryn Sion Street, Tydfil, Merthyr, Tydfil. So perhaps, David, you'll run us through the report.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm not going to go through the application again. I think I talked about the application last time at the July committee and also during the site visit. And at the last committee, it was resolved to deter the determination of the application to undertake a fact-finding visit. This took place on the 31st of July 2017. The points that were raised in the fact-finding site visit did not highlight any new issues that would change the original recommendation. The application is therefore recommended for permission subject to the conditions highlighted on pages 11 to 13 of the report. Thank you, Chairman.
So, are there any questions? Gareth, yes.
Thanks, Chair. Relates to page 13, and condition number 12, which refers to a communal grassed area. And by definition, a communal area means anyone can use it, not just the private owners. Who will maintain that grassed area?
It will still be privately owned, but it will be maintained by the owner of the land at that stage. The purpose of that condition is to prevent it being incorporated into any garden and really providing some visual amenity to that area as well as a grassed area of land, rather than being totally enclosed by a close border fence in someone's garden area.
Oh yes.
Condition number 11 refers to the widening or the improvements of the rear lane. Presumably the cost of that improvement is borne by the applicant. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in relation to one of the objections that were raised by those living in the area. It's listed on page 6, and it's the 4th dot down, where it states there, and I quote, "The previous dwellings on site were demolished due to issues concerning subsidence. Any further construction on site may cause further disruption to the surrounding land and properties." And if you go to page 13 and look at condition 10, which says no development shall take place until a structural design certificate completed and signed by a chartered engineer and a scheme to deal with existing ground conditions has been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority, and the certificate shall certify that appropriate site investigations have been carried out on the site. Does that include, because the property, these two properties where this land is vacant, we were told had been demolished, so clearly there was a reason why they were demolished, whether that's to do with previous mine workings there, and the building that was the end house. I think Councillor Colbron at a site meeting asked a question because there's a huge crack in that property. Would this structural design certificate, etc., have to take into account whether there's any subsidence on this particular plot of land?
Yeah, it'll be. As I think I mentioned at the site visit as well, it's a condition of the planning permission, but it's also will be controlled under the bigger building regulations as well to ensure that the foundations of the buildings are suitable for that location. If there's any issues, there'll be an investigation, a ground investigation, and the ground investigation will tell us what has to be put in terms of the foundations and the construction of the building, and that is to be improved by obviously a chartered engineer, and likewise that will be doubled up into the building regulations if permission were to be granted, and the building regulations would look at that issue as well. So it's twofold really. It's belt and braces to put it on the plan application, but it's also going to be considered under the building regulations.
So I think I know what the answer is, but I'll ask the question anyway. If that report comes back and the chartered engineer says that all the investigations have been carried out, that the land is unstable because of investigations they've undertaken and there's subsidence issues, that will come back to planning and building control, and what would happen to it then?
Well, obviously the condition wouldn't be discharged because it's not suitable development, but that's a very rare occasion. You can engineer out to most things these days in terms of construction, and it's highly likely that a report could be submitted. It may not be viable for them to do all the works that are required, but it's certainly a report could be provided to say that the building methods that will be used would be suitable and stable and wouldn't cause any future problems.
Are there any other questions? Are there any comments? No. The recommendation is that the application... Oh.
Need to say, Chair, I think the fact-finding visit proved how worthwhile such visits are, and I'm sure members of the committee would agree.
Yes, I thought it was very interesting to go, because we've got these pictures and things now which help a lot, but it was useful to go, I found, yes. Is anyone proposing? I was proposed. Is there a
Yes, yeah, I propose it.
Is there a seconder? Yeah, second, Julian. So all those in favour? So the next application on the agenda is P16 235, former Ysgol Santos Tydfil School. David's going to take us through this application now. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, this application relates to an area of vacant land, measures approximately 0.78 hectares. A large part of the site has got hard surfacing, which is kind of reminiscent of its former use as part of the Ysgol Santos Tydfil School. Notably, along the western edge of the site, if you look on the plan along this edge here, there's quite a steep embankment with a number of trees, and this slopes down towards Queen's Road. With this site, the difference in level between the top sort of eastern section of the site and Queen's Road, there's quite a significant level difference, so that presents a particular challenge for this site in terms of getting access into it. Outline planning permission is sought for the residential development of the site. Matters relating to the layout and access have been included in the considerations of this proposal. However, matters relating to the appearance, scale and landscaping of the development are still reserved for future considerations. The proposal which came with the application, I'll just take you through the next slide. This is a plan showing how they would propose to set out the 20 houses on there. Those across the western side of the site, they would have a frontage towards Queen's Road, and then across the back there you would have a number of properties which are all essentially centred around a main access road coming through the site. As a result of the publicity exercise, there were no objections raised from local residents. Those that adjoin the site are largely to the south. As Councillor Clive Jones mentioned earlier, you've got the sports field on the one side, and to the north then is and to the west are is part of the park and open space recreational areas. following the consultation exercise, largely there were no objections to the development. However, there were two sets of concerns raised by the landscape architect and the heritage officer. In both instances, the officers had concerns with the layout of the development itself, the potential boundary treatments that would come forward, and there were concerns that the site itself didn't lend itself to a suitable landscaping scheme which would complement the character of the area. The principle of development is considered to be acceptable, and there would be no adverse impacts to the highway network or to protected species and habitats. However, it's considered that the layout of the development is of an unacceptable design and would result in a poor relationship between the plots within the site, and would also fail to provide an adequate street frontages to the detriment of the quality of the residential environment. Additionally, the layout of the development would fail to demonstrate a suitable landscaping scheme could be accommodated. So, just to go through a couple of the slides here. The area of the site you can see is here, and you can see that in this, all along Queen's Row and in the surrounding areas, is the provision of large open areas of grassland, trees and vegetation is quite a significant feature of that area. To the south of the site you've got the conservation area, and there's a number of sort of listed buildings and things like that, so it's an important characteristic. This sort of gives you a couple of views looking up and down either side. So this is looking from the south of the site. There is an existing access serving the site, but at the moment that's not really going to be to the acceptable standard we'd expect today. To the north of the site, this is the view. So you can see that there's quite a steep embankment. So as I say, the access into the site is a particular challenge. And just to show you within the site, once you get to the top, it's basically a large areas, lots of hard standing areas, remains from the former school building, and that's an example. One of the access roads, as you can see, is quite narrow. And just to give you a flavour of the character of that area, I'm sure you're aware, you've got some nice sort of large semi-detached buildings, which some have got quite details on, but importantly you can see that they've got large front garden areas and distinctive boundary treatments with natural landscaping being a key feature of those areas. Some of the issues that I've raised in the report, you can see that these properties which front onto Queen's Road, there was nothing particularly too concerning about that in terms of the position of those houses within the site. And similarly, having a row of houses at the top of the site, again, there wouldn't be too much of an issue with that. But when you combine the two together, with the access road coming through the middle, a large part of the concern is that the top section of the street there is largely defined by side boundaries, the rear boundaries of these properties, which again gives rise to conflict between these properties wanting privacy in their gardens, but obviously they'd be open to the street. And there's also concerns about the relationship between properties, this one being sort of to the side, this plot in the corner is very cramped. You can see that by the access arrangement. And also, it's not very well shown on this particular drawing, but because of the steep embankment, the initial approach into the site, which is sort of suggested in the section above, would require retaining walls, which would reach, I think, near the top up to 3 meters high. So if you imagine those properties then wanting to enclose their gardens with at least a meter high fence, the initial impression in coming into the site is going to be high retaining walls with fencing above, and that pretty much continues through as you go through the development. So from a point of design where you're trying to create welcoming and interesting residential environments to live in, I don't think this demonstrates a successful story, unfortunately. So on this basis, it's recommended on page 25 of the report that the application be refused. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Just to clarify, on the plan we've got there, is it, I know several of these are semi-detached. Are there 17 properties on that particular plan, or 20?
There's 20. There's a mixture of detached and semi-detached. So the properties on the northern side, I think these are all detached. These ones are suggested to be semi-detached properties. The layout is being considered at this stage, but the nature of the houses could potentially change as part of the future applications anyway.
Are there any more questions? Are there any comments?
All I'd say, I'd be interested to know what the observations of the ward member was, that's all, because obviously you know it better than the rest of us.
Yeah, just looking at it, it looks like what you were saying, it's a very cramped sort of area, and with the children which play in our park as well, you know, I'd be very subdued about that sort of plan. You know, especially with the ones as we look at it here on the right, they'd be sort of interfering with Kaimaridun, the hill going up to the school, they're backing onto the houses there. Would they be looking into their properties?
Well, the houses on the south side here, I have looked at that in terms of potential overlooking. There is a boundary wall and fencing already along there, and given the separation distance of the houses, I think they would probably be okay in terms of not resulting in significant overlooking. In fact, as you go further up the hill, it's probably more likely that they'd be overlooking into this site. But yeah, I take your point in terms of the number of houses. The plots are much smaller, and I think that in part was the landscape architect's concern, where you've got large areas of hard standing, which doesn't allow then for planting to be introduced. Just to point out that historically there was outline permission granted previously, but in that scheme there was only 8 houses presented, not 20.
Howard?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to see this report, because when we had past training days, we've been to sites we developed in the past, where we all said on the site training about the overdevelopment, and I'm glad to be looking at this in a positive way, not to overdevelop.
Any more comments?
I agree with that. I think this is the fact that it's a detailed report. Planners have looked at this, and I think they've come to the right conclusion that on this particular site, it's overdeveloped. You can't look at it any other way, frankly. So hopefully a developer is going to take what we hope is going to be the decision we come to.
The recommendation is that the application be refused. So is anyone proposing that? Proposed, yes. Is the seconder? Seconded. The recommendations carried that it be refused. So the next item on the agenda was just for information really, that an appeal's been put in regarding application P1738, the erection of a first floor rear balcony. That's just for information. And agenda item 8 is a list of delegated decision reports. Sorry? Very good, yes. We've done item number 9. So item 10, any other business. I'm not aware of any other business. So that's the end of the meeting then. Okay, thanks very much.